On August 6, 1939, President Truman addressed the nation about 2 nuclear bombs that the U.S. had dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. These were the first atomic bombs in the world, and the creation process for them had been titled the Manhattan Project. This was a government-run project that was kept secret from not only the U.S., but the whole world. Not even the Vice President knew about it. These weapons of mass destruction were theorized once scientists had split the atom. But 2 things were necessary to make these explosions happen: plutonium and uranium. And whereabouts were these elements manufactured? On the Hanford site in Washington. Of course, this was a positive for the town, but here are 5 negative facts about the Hanford site.
The city of Hanford was one of 8 possible locations for the plutonium production of the Manhattan Project.
When Frank T. Mathias visited the Hanford site in a plane, he realized that all the resources would be met, and this was the place to build the reactor.
This is Larry Haler. He worked in the nuclear industry for 40 years. Throughout his time at the Hanford site, he worked as an operator trainee, a control room operator and supervisor, and then as a training department at the N reactor.
Landmass. Their original requirements were 14 by 24 square miles, and we ended up with basically the size of Connecticut, or a little bit less than the size of Connecticut, around 670 square miles.
It was decided early on that the public was not to be informed about the Manhattan Project. However, a commission from the Hanford also stated that the public and towns surrounding the area were not to be made aware of.
Where the Hanford radiation had the biggest effect was the communities downstream.
The hazardous waste was created from reprocessed irradiated uranium fuel rods used to recover plutonium for the nuclear weapons. Fuel rods were dissolved in nitric acid, which then separated plutonium from the solution. The ways of treating this was with sodium hydroxide. It would reduce the corrosiveness of the waste when put in storage tanks.
And so they knew there were some hazardous effects. The workers out here, when the reactor first started up, they didn't have the fancy equipment such as this thermolucent dosimeter, which detects how much radiation is passing through the earth right now.
The Hanford site was half the size of Rhode Island, meaning this is the largest environmental cleanup project in the world. The waste from this was then treated with sodium hydroxide to reduce the corrosiveness of the waste in the storage tanks, as previously stated. The 177 underground tanks holding upwards of 56 million gallons of radioactive waste lay under the surface at the Hanford site.
These carbon steel concrete tanks were created throughout the 1940s all the way until the 80s. As these tanks were made to hold chemicals for only up to 20 years, many of the tanks have leaked upwards of 1 million gallons of waste into the soil and to the Columbia River. A formal cleanup of the hazardous materials began in 1989 by the Department of Energy, the State of Washington, and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Today, the cleanup still remains incomplete and is expected to continue until 2040.
We'll probably spend about $18 billion building a vitrification plant to take care of all the low-level nuclear waste that is in our 177 tanks.
I'm here at the Hanford site in 2018, where the employment rates are higher due to the cleanup efforts than they ever were when the reactors were running.
Yes, the dropping of the atomic bombs won the war and did so very quickly. However, in the long run, it is considered to be one of the most controversial acts of warfare. It brought upon guilt from causing catastrophic amount of environmental damage and launched the United States into a massive debt, as well as a lifetime worth of cleanup, which is only costing the government more money. After hearing these 5 facts, what is your opinion on atomic bombs and their effect on the environment?